You might be surprised that this straight-sided, flat-bottomed coffee cup will collect less water in this condition in this part of my lawn than this coffee cup will in this part of my lawn. Furthermore, this coffee cup is going to collect a different amount of water for every hour that the sprinkler runs compared to all of the other zones in my yard. Now, the main reason for that is because each zone on my irrigation system here is shaped differently, and each zone has a different number of sprinkler head emitters installed on the ground. The disbursement of water is wider here than it is here. And this zone with more sprinkler heads operates at a lower PSI when measured from the emitter, as if I could do that, than this one does. Now, I don't recommend laying in your lawn with the sprinklers going when it's 35 degrees outside. I'm going to go ahead and warm myself up, and then I'll finish this video up a little bit later today when I can feel my fingers again. All right, so a few hours have passed. I've warmed up. It's warmed up outside a little bit. That was a ridiculous way to start the day. No joke, I was freezing cold. But here we are, and I want to step into this with another coffee cup. This is a smaller one, but it's still the same kind of frame. It's a straight edge with a flat bottom. So you could go out and just buy these little collection cups, rain gauge things that just stake into the ground. I've got a collection of them. These are just 3. Or you can just use coffee cups. It's all the same, coffee cup with a ruler. If you put it right there in the lawn, this thing is going to collect a different amount of water at the optimal time of day if you put it there in July versus April versus January. And the reason for that is somewhat obvious. Air temperature. Ambient air temperature outside causes more evaporative loss. As the temperature goes up, the evaporative loss goes higher. Assuming it doesn't get to freezing, as it drops, the evaporative loss gets a lot smaller. Now, there's a couple different ways that we can talk about evaporative loss. What I'm referring to here is the evaporative loss of the water as it is flying through the air. So it comes out of the sprinkler, flies through the air, some of it evaporates, and then it hits the ground. As that happens through hotter air, more evaporation occurs. So we're spitting out, let's call it, a lot of water comes out of the sprinkler, and only some of that water hits the ground. It looks like it all does, but it doesn't. Now, various scenarios actually cause the evaporation of the water to increase, even if the duration or the fly pattern is the same. And that has to do with the water droplet size. So whatever mechanism you're using, whether it be an in-ground sprinkler or any number of the above-ground sprinkler options out there, if it is spitting out large droplet sizes, less evaporation is going to happen before it hits the ground. If it's like a fine mist, then a lot of evaporation is going to happen before it hits the ground. Because of that, it's in your best interest to use a sprinkler head that will give you good coverage that actually uses larger water droplet sizes, especially in a scenario where you've got no bare dirt. This is all grass right here. If you got a lot of bare dirt, then large droplet sizes are going to cause like some erosion problems. But once you have full coverage of grass, get that water droplet size up if you can. Now, here's a few more scenarios about the coffee cup. If there's a lot of wind in the air, you're going to end up having more evaporative loss because of the extra wind traveling through these water droplets. You're also going to have more wind loss, where it's not necessarily evaporating, but if you're sprinkling this area and the wind is blowing it away from that area, that means a lot of your water is not actually going onto the lawn, it's going where you don't want it. In almost all scenarios, this is just a big waste of water. If my water goes over there to the other side of the fence line where I don't keep grass, that's just a natural hillside. I don't want to irrigate over there. Now, in another scenario, if you're putting this cup down in, say, for instance, Georgia, where the relative humidity is high, versus the exact same cup in the exact same situation, which is impossible, in the middle of Las Vegas, Nevada, then where the relative humidity is quite low, you're going to end up getting a lot more water in the cup in the humid environment. So in a real world scenario, that would be at dawn, relative humidity tends to be much higher than it is in the middle of the afternoon. That's why it's common to find frost or dew on the grass in the morning, or a foggy morning that burns off later in the day. Now, here's a totally weird example. This is another coffee cup. This one's metal. I put saran wrap over the top of it to simulate what it's like when you have soil that is hydrophobic. If I were to splash water on top of this cup, then a lot of the water would hit the plastic and splash off or roll off the sides. I would have to put the water on extremely slowly to get that water to bead on the plastic and go through the little holes that I punctured on it to collect in the cup. A hydrophilic cup or hydrophilic soil does not have that resistance. When the water goes to the cup, it goes straight in. For soil, when you have hydrophilic soil, the water hits the soil and absorbs straight in. There isn't runoff. The biggest point to keep in mind here is that we need to understand how much water, how much time it takes our sprinklers to run to get the correct amount of water into the soil of our lawn. So if we do have hydrophobic soil, we need to kind of pre-moisten it a little bit to limit runoff. That might mean running your sprinklers for a couple minutes and then letting it sit for 10 to 15 before you go ahead and do the full irrigation cycle. If that's not a problem, then you don't have to worry about that. But you do need to time how much time it takes your irrigation system to put an inch of water into your soil at the optimal time of the day and ideally at the optimal day of the week. And that's why we have to really check our weather forecasts. Get yourself a collection of these. You can usually buy them in a bundle. They don't cost very much. If you don't want to buy them, just go ahead and grab all of the straight edge coffee cups in your house. On a night of the week before a cool, calm morning in the middle of the spring, in the most optimal conditions that you can find, go ahead and put your collection cups or your coffee cups in the lawn and set your sprinkler zone to go off so that it runs until dawn. If dawn is at 5 o'clock in the morning, let it run from 4 o'clock until 5 o'clock. Then you can go out first thing in the morning and measure how much water collected in that hour. Do your math, figure out how much time it takes to do an entire inch of water into the lawn soil. Once you figure out that calculation, then that's what we're going to base our irrigation patterns on for the entire season, even the harsh times of the year in late June, July, and August. Now, my regular subscribers of this channel know for a fact that for as long as I've run this channel, I have always advised people to figure out the best way that they can to run their sprinklers one time a week at max. And if our grass systems need 1 inch of water per week, then that basically means we need to run each zone by itself once a week if we're not getting any rain. I actually don't advise using an irrigation control box that will kick your sprinklers on automatically every single time, the same time of the week, unless it's incredibly sophisticated and can tie into your actual local weather patterns. Like it won't turn it on if you got rain yesterday, that sort of a thing. Most people don't have that. I don't have that. I actually have an irrigation control box and I don't have it set. I actually set it up manually every single week based on the weather that I'm expecting and what physical applications of products I'm going to be putting down in the lawn in that particular week. Doing this allows me to be able to run zone 1 for the amount of time needed to get an inch down on the ground and have the whole thing shut off right at dawn. And then the next day I'll run zone 2 so that it shuts off at dawn. And the same thing for zone 3. But if I happen to get rain that week, then I can easily alter the pattern simply by not turning the sprinkler on until it's needed again. Each zone runs enough to get an inch of water on the lawn for that particular week. If I'm having a drizzly day within a relatively dry week, then that also ends up being the day that I'm going to go ahead and irrigate the lawn. If I kind of expect to get, let's say, 2/10 of an inch of rain on one single day of an entire week, then that is the day of the week that I'm going to add 0.8 of an inch of irrigation to the lawn. That way, all of the water is getting into the lawn on the same day, a mixture of irrigation and natural rainfall. Now, as spring starts transitioning into summer and we start getting hot temperatures towards the end of spring or maybe even the early parts of summer, we still want to be going on with this 1 inch of water in one single session. The thing is, our overnight temperatures and our early morning cool mornings are going to be a lot warmer during this time of the year than they are in the earlier parts of spring, the earlier or mid-temperate parts of spring. So evaporation is actually going to increase a little bit. As evaporation increases because of temperatures in the morning, we're going to have to increase the duration of our sprinkling session. You might want to go ahead and retest how much water is hitting the lawn when temperatures start increasing a little bit later in the year. Typically, you can increase the duration of your sprinkling sessions by approximately 20%, and ballpark figure that's going to work most of the time. Eventually, you're going to have a hot stretch, a particularly hot stretch for where you live, and in situations like that, the duration of the watering session might get to the point where you're going to have a lot of extra runoff, simply because you're putting so much water down for such a long period of time. At that point, it then starts making sense to separate your watering sessions into 2 times a week, and instead of doing, let's call it 100% duration, you're doing approximately 60% duration, but 2 times a week. So I hope that makes sense, but you're basically doing 120% of standard duration, maybe upwards of 150% of standard duration, but you're splitting it in half, so you're doing it every 3 to 4 days. For me, where I live, and for a lot of people where they live, that's really only going to encompass a couple months out of the year, and most places really only get really hot 1 or 2 weeks out of the summer season. Certainly summer is hot, but there's always one random week in every summer that everyone remembers as the hot week. Now, there's lots of other factors. There's actually a lot of small factors that go into water loss and preventing water loss when we're irrigating the lawn. If I were to go into all of these smaller factors for this video, it would be wildly long and dull for the vast majority of watchers. But I do want to present them to you. So I have largely this entire video with all of that extra stuff written in a blog post, which I have linked in the video description below. If you are interested in taking a look at that, some of those factors include sprinkler zone setup, emitter choices, the actual style of sprinklers that are used, both above ground and below ground, and a number of other things. If you care about getting really granular, make sure to take a look at that blog post link below. This video isn't supposed to get granular. It's supposed to be about the fundamentals. It's about using water efficiently in our lawns in the most obvious ways possible, the simplest things to explain that have the biggest impact on your lawn and your water usage. But not only that, there is a part 2 to this video. This video, like I've talked about, is all about how do we get water on the lawn. The second part of this video will appear in your subscription feed a little bit later in the season. And for those of you watching this in the future, it will be linked up in the corner at the end of this video. It's all about what we can do outside of watering the lawn to improve water retention in the lawn so that we don't have to water it as often or with as much water in the first place. We don't want to put excessive amounts of water down. We want to put only as much water down as is necessary to keep the lawn going. What many of you already know is that I live in Oregon. We live in drought conditions right now on the West Coast. Water conservation is very important to me. I believe that we should be good stewards of the water that we use because we're putting it on the lawn. I put it in the garden. I want to put as little as possible so that I can demonstrate that I care about everything else that is going on in this world out of my control. Make sure to watch this video linked right up here to see what steps I'm taking to limit my water usage in my own lawn.